Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another G News review and analysis. Today's topic is what Christopher Luxon said today on TVNZ Breakfast when asked about the situation with regard to redress for those people who suffered abuse in state care and the recommendations of the Royal Commission into State Abuse in Care, and where we're up to with all of that in terms of priorities when it comes to spending. TVNZ featured a story early in the morning about a case that is going to be brought to the High Court this morning by a barrister who is representing some of the survivors. And the premise there is that the redress system and offer that's been made at the moment by the government doesn't conform with the international law and the treaty called CAT, which is the Convention Against Torture that New Zealand signed up to and came into effect on the 26th of June 1987. So if the government can find all this money for defence spending suddenly and pull rabbits out of a hat when it wants to conform to what Donald Trump says the world must do and reach 2% of GDP on defence spending, then why can't it actually compensate our survivors of abuse and state care adequately? Here's some footage from TVNZ Breakfast earlier this morning.
And essentially what we are saying is that the decision by Cabinet, this new redress framework, does not comply with international minimum standards under the Torture Convention.
And the point was made that the $150,000 roughly for the survivors that had been allocated didn't address the difference between those who had experienced severe torture and abuse for long periods of time and those that had only been subject to it for a short period of time. So those that had suffered much more for longer really should be entitled to a great deal more than the government under Nicola Willis is offering.
We're saying this decision should be struck down and the government needs to start from scratch. And we actually have a proposal we can put forward. So this is a draft bill to establish a torture compensation tribunal, which would basically look at what is in the treaty, what's required under the treaty that we've signed up to 30, 40 years ago, and deliver that. And it's really not that difficult, to be honest.
So here's what Christopher Luxon first of all said when he was asked about this case that is being brought to the High Court this morning.
Good to be with you. Before we get to defence, just want to come back to an interview we had earlier on the show about Lake Alice. Illegal claims that the redress doesn't meet UN standards. Do you think that has a chance in court, and why can't the government come to the party a little bit more on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, first and foremost, as you'd appreciate, it's not appropriate for me to comment on cases that are before the courts.
But hold on a minute. The case hadn't been put to the High Court at the time that question was asked. So,
well, the case will be filed this morning.
So Christopher Luxon could have answered questions because the case wasn't yet before the High Court. He was just trying to evade and avoid answering questions like we've seen before on many, many topics with Christopher Luxon and his poor leadership.
The second thing is to make sure we get a better redress system in place, and Erica Stanford will talk more about that soon.
Soon? Soon? What does soon mean?
And the third thing, the most important thing, is to make sure that we're doing everything we can in our practices and operating procedures to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
About 5 months ago, John Campbell had the Children's Commissioner on Q&A, and at that time she was saying the speed at which redress is progressing was just not fast enough. They were dragging the chain.
Enough.
Well, as I say, this has to galvanise change, and the pace of change isn't fast enough yet.
Because the Royal Commission's report came out in July 2024. Christopher Luxon's government said it would have redress sorted out by Christmas. Then they walked that back because they hadn't done anything, because they basically didn't prioritise it or didn't care. And it gets worse because even now, according to the statistics, abuse in state care is carrying on under this ACT Party, National and New Zealand First government, and it's actually just getting worse.
And in the last year of statistics that have been reported, 519 children did experience abuse, neglect or harm in our state care system, and actually the incidences of harm were higher, 894. So that means that some of those children experienced abuse or harm in state care more than once. Completely unacceptable.
So there you have it. They can't find a penny more to pay redress, and when it comes to defence spending, yeah, that's no problem.
But importantly, we've also set aside the money. And so we're going to spend $12 billion on defence. $9 billion of that will be new money.
Finally, the TVNZ interview got round to saying, hey, what about health spending? Why are the doctors all on strike?
A lot of people are going to be watching this thinking, $12 billion. Goodness me, that's a lot of money to be spending on something. When you look at the health system at the moment and the doctors striking last week, thinking, surely that's better spent elsewhere.
Well, our budget will actually be able to increase spending on health, as we've been doing over the last budget.
Why have you pretended to put a record amount into healthcare when it's inadequate? Luxon repeated the deceptions that he's constantly been making to the New Zealand public, that they'd invested more in health. More than what? Well, not more than inflation.
We put another almost $17 billion in on top of what we already spend.
In Budget 2024, the amount invested and committed into health, as you know, was only a 0.35% increase over the previous year. And because it didn't account for inflation in real terms, this was a 2.9% cut.
We'll spend more on education, we're spending more on law and order, and so we are going to invest in those things that matter most to New Zealanders as well, which is health and education, and you've seen us do that.
So now when he talks about more, what he means is not adequate. More but not adequate amounts of spending will go into health, and we can continue to make inadequate spending on health and education and all the other areas while we spend like a drunken sailor on defence spending. And then there's this slogan that we cannot have any prosperity unless we have security.
Relatively speaking, though, shouldn't more of that defence budget be put to those other things?
No, we can do both these things. I mean, it's important in 2025. You cannot have economic prosperity without security.
But we've had security being a little bit questionable for quite a long time, and we're still talking about growth and prosperity anyway. So it's a bit of a rubbish slogan. Even if we bought these helicopters and drones and all the other equipment that's in the Defence Capability Plan, will New Zealand have security? Will it be able to fight off a superpower like China if it wanted to invade us? No. It's just, as you can see, it's all complete bunk and rubbish, and the arguments and slogans don't add up at all. It's just ridiculous. I mean, but he's going to keep repeating them because that's what Luxon does. He's a spinner that spins things that don't make sense and don't connect. Finally, when it came to the massive effect that Trump had on Canadians, galvanising them together to come together to resist the Trumpian government, and the same happening in Australia, Christopher Luxon simply decided to block his ears and deny that all that was happening.
We've seen come from behind wins for both Australia and Canada with those sort of more left-leaning, centre-left-leaning parties. What can you learn from what seems to be politically happening in Canada and Australia?
Yeah, I don't think that's the learning from these elections.
That he didn't believe that all of the international press, all of the experts, all of the political commentators around the world who have been talking about the huge effect that the Trump government is having. Do
you think the Trump effect is a thing for those elections?
No, I don't, because
because you see right now, incumbency is the key. So if you're a government and you're in power and you pretend that you know about the economy.
The lesson very clearly is the public want incumbent governments that have strong economic management that can get their countries through unstable times.
Take a look at Christopher Luxon pretending that it's about incumbency and that he knows all about the economy.
And if you think about our government, we've been focused on the economy from day one. You hear me talk about it all the time.
Well, let's talk about how Christopher Luxon clearly knew all about Family Boost, and he must have known that only about 50 people would get that when he was electioneering and telling everybody he understood the economy. Look, everybody in the country who has an average income and 2 kids will get $250 a fortnight in tax cuts. He obviously understood everything. He understood everything too. He was a master of the economy when Nicola Willis just quickly cancelled those ferries without plan B and gave South Korea about 1 hour's notice by text. That was understanding the economy. Oh, and the greatest and deepest recession in 2024 since 1991 came because Christopher Luxon understood the economy. He's a real economic expert, isn't he? He's really dragged on this recession. We see growth now falling away because Christopher Luxon didn't anticipate anything happening with Trump tariffs, couldn't see it, thought he was growing things, hasn't produced anything from his investment summit, is trying to sell us really expensive private capital in the form of private partnerships with the government that are just going to cost us all more in the long run. And at the same time that Nicola Willis is saying, well, it's not Trumpian and we need to cut our cloth and we need to pull back, suddenly we've got all this money for defence that's just growing on the magical money tree.
People go to governments and leaders, frankly, that actually know and understand that economy and can navigate those choppy waters well.
Because these are mixed messages, massive mixed messages. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would still be in power if it was all about incumbency, wouldn't they? But obviously, Christopher Luxon thinks he knows it's just about incumbency. It's not about a reaction to Trump. There's no left-wing or caring government or do it our way about this. It's all just about his fantasy that he knows and understands the economy, which he clearly doesn't. It's crashed construction. We've seen a reduction in the number of people employed. We've seen people leaving for Australia. It's just been one thing after the other, a bunch of botch-ups. So that's all I had to say this morning after a quick review of Christopher Luxon's take on the Australian election and how he thinks he's some kind of economic wizard when he clearly isn't. Have a great morning, and I'll catch you all again soon.